okay? And we have case reports in them, and we have case series in them, for example. Now, and we have descriptive epidemiology for that. Now, analytical studies, the focus of today's session is on analytical studies, in which we have experimental, in which we intervene. We give a group a certain experimental regime, and we do not give another group the experimental regime. The basic idea is to have comparison. Now, remember, throughout this presentation, you need to have comparison in order to estimate anything in the population, any health condition in a population, any event in a population. The comparison group is most important. In case control studies, it is the control group that is the comparison group, and the cases are the people who have the disease. And in non-experimental analytical type of studies, we have cohort studies, and cross-sectional are sometimes known as descriptive or as analytical studies. It depends upon the analysis. If you're doing advanced analysis in cross-sectional studies, they're also known as analytical studies, otherwise the simple descriptive studies. So to start off with, this is the sequence of any study design. We have several study designs, as I just mentioned. You have descriptive epidemiology, in which you have case reports, you have case series. Now, a hypothesis is an idea, any hunch that any researcher wants to propose about any phenomenon in the universe. So these comprise of descriptive epidemiology. And then you have lab studies, you have animal studies in descriptive epidemiology. And then going further towards analytical epidemiology, you have clinical trials in which you have experiments. And then you have hypothesis testing. So there is a hypothesis that is generated through preliminary studies like case reports and case series. And then that hypothesis is tested through analytical studies like cohort studies, case control, and cross-sectional surveys. So what's the purpose of descriptive epidemiology? Just a small recap. It's to generate hypotheses, to permit the evaluation of different trends regarding different health conditions and diseases. So we can compare these trends between countries and within different subgroups in a country or in an area, and to provide a basis for planning, provision, and evaluation of health services. The policy makers just want these graphs of descriptive based on descriptive epidemiology or descriptive studies, and to identify problems to be studied by analytical methods, and to suggest areas that may be fruitful for investigation. So analytical studies are basically to test the hypothesis. There are two basic designs. You have case control or retrospective studies. I'll further in my presentation also elaborate that if we do retrospective case control studies can also be prospective. They are not necessarily retrospective, so they can be in both directions. Cohort studies or prospective studies, they're mostly forward going, but they can also be backwards. Cohort study designs. We're not discussing cohort right now. Our basic focus is on case control studies. So as I mentioned earlier, that there must be a comparison group. If there's no control, there will be no conclusion. In this case, in case control studies, we have a control group and cases who have the disease. So coming towards analytical study designs, in cohort study, as I mentioned, we go forwards in time. So there's a group of people known as a cohort. So if there's, there are different cohort groups, like we're a cohort of Liaquat National Medical College, for example. There could be age cohorts, people who belong to the same, who have the same age group. There are city cohorts. It's basically a group of people. Now you have some people who have the exposure, you have some people who will not have the exposure. And then you see them for 10 or 20 years and you see the outcome in them, that for example, people who were smokers and non-smokers, and then you see after 20 years who developed lung cancer and who did not develop lung cancer. Now coming towards case control studies, this is mostly backwards in direction, in which you have the people who have lung cancer and people who do not have lung cancer. They will be the control group. Now please remember, these controls may have any other disease, but they should not have the disease that the cases have. So they should not be free of lung cancer. That is very important. So we have a good comparison group. So we go towards, we have these cases and we have the controls, and we ask them about their past exposure or their present exposure regarding cigarette smoking, for example. And cross-sectional surveys are at one point in time. They have the exposure and the outcome at the same point in time. So we are starting now with the case control studies. We start with the identification of a group of cases, individuals with a particular health outcome in a given population, and to compare with them is a group of controls, the individuals without the health outcome, which need to be included in the study. Now, the crucial part here is the selection of controls. The controls should come ideally from the same population as that of the cases, and we should not think about their exposure status. I'll discuss this further. And for each case, it is recommended that we should have 3 or 4 controls. For one case, there should be ideally 3 or 4 controls. This tends to increase the power of the study. But if you have limited resources, you can still have one case and one control. The ratio can be 1:1. So to estimate the magnitude of association between an exposure and an outcome is the basic crux of case control studies. So it's a backward design. Mostly it's a backward design that compares a group of cases and controls who don't have the disease with respect to their current or their previous exposure to anything. The exposure data is collected backwards in time. So the people have to, the cases and the controls have to recall their past exposures. So it's usually faster because there and then you just go into the population, you have the cases and the controls, you ask them or you take their blood tests or whatever is required, whatever the tool that you're using, and you have the results at that point in time. And it's more cost effective compared to cohort studies, for which you have to wait for around 10-20 years for a condition to develop. But they are sensitive to bias because it's looking backwards in time. So you have different types of biases: recall bias, observer bias, and selection bias. We'll talk about these later. It's the most feasible design when we are comparing rare outcomes. Okay, rare diseases, rare outcomes. Please keep this in your mind. We'll discuss this further. What is a rare outcome? For example, Down syndrome. We don't have these babies with Down syndrome very commonly. They're just out of 5 or 6 families, you might not even get one Down syndrome family. So out of 100, you might have 1 or 2 families with a case of Down syndrome. So it is considered to be a relatively rare condition. So it's important case control studies when the condition is rare. So this is how we start. We have this point in time. You have the study population, you have the cases, you have the controls who do not have the disease that the cases suffer from. And then you see who amongst the cases had the exposure and who amongst them did not have the exposure. And again, in the controls, you see who had the exposure that we're talking about, the exposure of interest. And please remember, we can have multiple exposures. Like people with lung cancer might have the statement that they have been smoking for 10 years, for example, but then they might give other experiences as well. For example, they might be working in a factory where there's heavy polluted air. So that, for example, can also lead to an exposure to develop lung cancer. So you have multiple exposures in case control studies. This is the beauty of the case control studies, that you have multiple exposure, but it's ideal for rare disease conditions. So here, there's another schematic visual display of the population with the outcome, with the cases. You have them, the disease, and you have certain people who are exposed and certain who are not exposed to the pertinent factor. And then there's a population without the outcome or the disease of interest. And then in backwards in time, you ask them about their exposure history. So as I said, it's very important to carefully select cases and controls. If you're not going to do that, that depends upon your data collection quality. How are you collecting the data, and how are you defining a case and a control? So you can select cases from patient rosters at medical facilities, outpatient department, and admitted patients. You can have death certificates, and then from these death certificates, you can certain people who have certain have had certain exposures. If you don't have the exposure history, you can also ask the relatives of the deceased people from through these death certificates. You can contact them, and that's known as surrogate interviews, by the way. You can have disease registries. You can use them. You may use incident or prevalent cases. Incident are new and prevalent are old and new cases. That is why you must define your case definition should be there. Now, coming towards the controls, you can have non-hospital controls such as other family members without the disease. You can have friends, you can have neighbors or colleagues, and you can have hospital controls as well. Now, a particular problem that is there with case control studies is the selection of a comparable group, which is the control group. It should be very much similar to the cases. So I'll just give an example, share an example with you. So we had this study in which we compared people having nephrolithiasis, kidney stones, with patients who did not have nephrolithiasis, and then we wanted to see their exposure history regarding carbonated drinks. Now, our researcher, she was a new person. She did not know the importance of case control studies, how important it is to have a defined case and a control. So what did she do? She knew that people who would consume carbonated drinks would end up eventually in having kidney stones. This is what we wanted to prove in our research, basically. So what error did she do? She, without knowing, she actually knew about the exposure and the outcome. So because of her knowledge, because she already knew about it, she took only those cases having nephrolithiasis who also gave a positive history of having consumed carbonated drinks, just to prove her hypothesis correct. So that is a very incorrect way of collecting the data for case control studies. What should be ideal is that the person collecting the data should be blind of who is a case and who is a control, and evenly take both the cases and controls from the same population. Okay? So controls are used to estimate the prevalence of exposure or the factor in the population which gave rise to the cases. The ideal control group would comprise of a random sample from the general population that again gave rise to the cases, but this is not always possible in practice. So our goal as a researcher is to select individuals in whom the distribution of exposure status would be the same ideally as that of the cases. In the absence of an exposure disease association, we should not know about the exposure disease association, which is obviously not possible. That is, if there is no true association between the exposure and the disease, the cases and the controls should have the same distribution of exposure. So that is when we know that if the cases are consuming more of something of a harmful exposure, and the controls are not do not have the disease under question, and they were not exposed to that pertinent factor, that is when we compare and we can say that yes, this is the causative agent of the certain disease, resulting in the certain disease. So the sources of controls is dependent on the sources of the cases. In order to minimize bias, different types of biases that we'll discuss about, controls should be selected to be a representative sample of the population which produce the cases. For example, if we are selecting people from as cases from the GP register, then the controls should also comprise a sample from the same GP register not having the disease in question. So because the control group is used to estimate the distribution or the prevalence of exposure in the control population, the main requirement of the control selection is that the controls be sampled independently of exposure status. And if there is a prevalence of exposure that is more common among the cases than the controls, you may say that it is a risk factor for the outcome under investigation, which is a very big statement. If it's going to be published, it's a big statement. So how do we measure exposure status? It is to assess the presence or the level of exposure for each individual for the period of time before they had the disease or condition under the investigation, when the exposure would have acted as a causal factor. And in case control studies, the measurement of exposure is established only after of the disease, cases and their past exposure, and as a result is more prone to recall and observer biases. The methods to a certain exposure status may be several. You have standardized questionnaires, you have biological samples, interviews with subjects, interviews with spouse or other members of the family, medical records, employment records, and pharmacy records. And the procedure used to collect data for the cases should be the same as that for the controls in order to minimize bias. Let's go through an example now. Diethyl stilbestrol was given uh, in late 1960s. Um, it was there were some cases, very unusual cases. It was actually given much earlier than that, during World War II, when women had problems with fertility, and miscarriages were very common. So this was introduced with and 15 to 22 years later, it was found out that women had been coming with an unusual vaginal cancer that was not common in even older women. So these were young ladies that came to the clinics, to Michigan General Hospital. They identified very unusual cancer clusters in 1960. There were 8 women who were aged 15 to 22 years who were found to have adenocarcinoma, which is very uncommon even in elderly women. So this cluster of cases, initially there were case reports, and then they developed a hypothesis out of it. And then it became a case series when there were multiple cases, similar cases, and then there was a case control study to establish or to um, affirm this hypothesis or to refute it. So adenocarcinoma was this was mm, the defined cause. The defined cause was because of the consumption of diethyl stilbestrol, and the women who took it, their daughters, their offsprings, after 15 to 22 years, developed these cancers. So it's a very long latent period. Okay? So in case control studies, it's a very rare condition. Diethyl stilbestrol led to adenocarcinoma. Adenocarcinoma is a very rare condition. And please remember that it took a very long time for development. For these types of conditions where it takes very long for the exposure to result in the disease, the ideal studies are case control. So why did we choose? Why did they choose case control studies? The disease was extremely rare. There was a very long latent period. Means the exposure took very long for it to exhibit the signs and symptoms and the development of the disease. And initially they had no idea what was responsible for, and so there were many possible exposures to consider. So they could have for example, the effects of the World War II, the nuclear effects of that. Then they had diethyl stilbestrol. They could have many other effects that led to the development of adenocarcinoma. Since case control studies start with people who have the outcome, rather than starting with a population that is free of disease and waiting to see who develops it. This is the cohort study. It is possible to enroll a sufficient number of patients who have the rare disease. So you had all those patients who came with adenocarcinoma, and then you ask them about their past exposure. So what are the biases in case control studies and how do we control them? Information bias, the first type of bias, in which you have recall and observer bias. So biases may be introduced as a result of poor study design. You did not develop the study very rigorously, the case control study, or you did not have a uniform data collection of exposure and outcome data. So recall bias is when cases and controls based on their disease status may recall past exposure differently, as the disease and exposure have already occurred at the outset of a case control. For example, this coronavirus infection. If I don't have the infection, I might not recall where did I go in the past 1 month, who did I meet in the past 1 month. But if I am a case of COVID-19, God forbid, I will be able to recall all the places and all the exposures that I had even 3 or 4 months before. So because I tried to think that what led to this disease, this infection in me. So often the experience of having the disease that is being studied encourages an effort after meaning, which means whereby the person who is a case has already gone over his or her life history in an attempt to understand why he or she had become ill and why did others not become ill. So an example, I'll share another example, cases with multiple episodes of major depression as an adult may be more likely to recall and report if they had child abuse when they were children than controls with no history of mental health problems. So for example, there's a person who does not have major depression, who is very happy in his life. He might not remember uh, such an event probably, because that might be very distant in his memory. But a person who has major depression might have it because of sexual abuse and might have had that exposure and does remember that very well. And then we have interviewer or observer bias. The recording of exposure information may vary depending on the investigator's knowledge of an individual's disease status. So an investigator who believes that sexual abuse does cause major depression in adulthood might put extra effort into obtaining disclosure of abuse from the subjects or from the cases who have depression compared to those people who are controls who don't have depression. So this is when the interviewer knows about the outcome and the association between the outcome and the exposure. This is also known as observer bias. So selection bias is another type of bias. It's when we select cases and controls in a different way. It's a particular problem inherent in case control studies where it gives rise to non-comparability. So cases and controls need to be need to be similar. It occurs when cases or controls are included in or excluded from a study because of some characteristic they exhibit, which is related to the exposure or to the risk factor under evaluation. As I gave the example of our researcher, who included only those cases who had a history of consumption of carbonated drinks, so as to establish an association that she thought would have to exist. So when individuals are selected as controls, are representative of the population that produce the cases, this is when uh, are unrepresentative of the population that produce the cases. So you have to have the controls from the same population that that produce the cases. Another bias that is very important is Bergsonian bias. Bergson's bias, it is also called as, it's a bias that is introduced in hospital-based case control studies. So where do we take the cases from? We only take them from the cases, from the hospitals, mostly from the hospitals. And who are the people who come to the hospitals? People who are ill, who had most probably had an exposure, such as alcohol intake, cigarette smoking. But people who do not come to the hospital, they might not be so unwell. They might not be having a history of exposure to these factors. So selection bias is in case control studies is a particular problem when cases and controls are recruited exclusively from hospitals or clinics. So these hospitals tend to have different characteristics compared to when they're taken from the population. For example, they have higher levels of alcohol consumption or cigarette smoking. And if these characteristics are related to the exposure under investigation, then estimates of the exposure among controls may be different from that in the reference population, resulting in a biased estimate of the association between exposure and the disease. For example, if you're taking hospital cases, and then you're taking community controls, people in the who do not have the disease, you're taking them from the community. Now people in the hospital will obviously come with serious conditions, and they will obviously have um, harmful consumption, and the controls will obviously not be so serious that they have to come to the hospital, and they might not have these exposures. How to minimize bias? Information bias can be reduced in case control studies by keeping participants and observers blind. They don't know about the hypothesis under the investigation, which for a researcher is not possible. So a layman can go and can be trained very well in the field and collect the data. At the analysis phase as well, the bias can be minimized. Matching is a process again to minimize certain confounders. Now we'll talk about confounders. And what is matching? It is a process by which we select the controls in a way that they're similar to the cases to some certain factors, like for example, age. So we have a case who is around 30 years old for having lung cancer, and we have a control who is again 30 years old who does not have lung cancer, any other condition, but may or may not be present, but lung cancer definitely would not be present in the control. So we're adjusting for controls and and the cases, and we're matching them on age. So we're not seeing the influence of age on them. So you can have individual matching in which one individual is matched with one case is matched with one control, and you can have group matching in which a group of cases is compared with matched with a group of controls. Confounders in matching controls to cases, we can use the effects of confounders. A confounding variable is one which is associated with exposure and is a cause of the outcome. For example, there's a toxin A in any sunscreen lotion that we use that led to melanoma, for example. But exposure to this toxin is also associated with exposure to sun. So whenever there's increased sunlight, we tend to use that sunscreen very much. And then that sunscreen led to melanoma. But the sunlight as well led to melanoma development. So the sunlight is a potential confounder of the association between toxin X, the sunscreen lotion, and melanoma. This is an example of a confounder. So when we keep sunlight, we keep cases and controls the same for age. For example, age now is a confounder. So for example, people who are of older ages might have lung cancer compared to people who are younger. So we kept age similar for the cases and the controls. But in doing so, we will not be able to see the effect of age now anymore, because we have cases who are 30 years old and then we have controls who are also 30 years old. So we cannot see the impact of age because that's nullified when we match for them. So there are practical problems. It's very difficult to have a case and a control of the same age, for example. And then the conceptual problems in which matched characteristics in cases and controls cannot be studied. For example, age cannot be studied anymore. If that is an exposure, if that can lead to the disease or not. Now coming towards the advantages and disadvantages of case control studies. It's a relatively easy study to carry out. It's rapid and inexpensive. It requires comparatively few subjects. As I said, if it's a rare condition. Particularly appropriate for outbreak investigations. For example, if we have outbreaks here of COVID-19, for example, it's suitable to investigate rare diseases. There's no risk to subjects. You're not experimenting. You're not giving one a drug. You're not giving the others no drug, and you're not experimenting. So experimental studies have risks inherent to subjects. There's no loss to follow up. You just take the cases and you take the controls and you take the history from them at that point in time. You're not following them in the future. So there's no loss to follow up, and there are very minimal ethical problems in it. And what are the disadvantages? There may be recall bias. As I mentioned earlier, it may be subject to observer and selection bias. Selection of an appropriate control may be difficult, and it is we cannot distinguish between causes and associated factors. Okay? So we cannot say for certain that is a certain exposure associated with a disease, or is it the cause of the disease. And it is inefficient for rare exposures. For example, if you have just 5 or 6 cases of a disease, and you backwards in time, you talk about their exposures, for example, lung cancer, and you in the past you ask about their exposure to asbestos, and asbestos now is very common. But if, for example, it was not so common in the past, these exposures can be very minimal. You won't have a good association between the disease and the exposure. And they do not calculate incidence of the disease. You just have the prevalent cases, you don't have the new cases. The practical value of producing rapid results or investigating rare outcomes may outweigh the limitations of case control studies. Because of their efficiency, they may be also ideal for preliminary investigation of a suspected risk factor for a common condition. So the conclusions may be used to justify a more costly and time-consuming longitudinal study later on. Coming towards the last objective of our today's session, odds ratio. It's a measure of association. How closely, how strongly is the exposure related to or associated with the outcome under of interest. So it's also called OR. It's a measure of the strength of association between the risk factor and the outcome. The risk factor is the exposure and the outcome is the disease. The ratio of the odds, it's also, the definition can also be given as the ratio of the odds of the development of disease in exposed persons to the odds of development of disease in unexposed people or the controls, or it's the ratio of the odds that cases were exposed to the odds that the controls were exposed. What is odds? It's probability that an event of interest occurs to the probability that it does not occur. For example, the probability that an event will occur to the probability that an event will not occur. Suppose there's probability of today having rain, which is 20%. It's not 20%, it might be less than 5%. What is the odds of having rain? You can write your answers if you know the simple maths in your comments. So coming towards the formula for odds ratio, there are, it has a 2x2 table in which above here, you have the rows in which you have the people who are ill and people who are not ill, the cases and the controls. We are taking an exposure to ice cream, for example. People who consumed these are the columns. In the columns, you have people who have been exposed to a certain ice cream and people who were not exposed to a certain ice cream. Now, these cases will tell you about their exposure, whether they consumed a particular ice cream or not, and the controls will also tell you about the same exposure. Now, as we can see, there's so many people who did consume the ice cream and did not fall ill. And there are very few people who are ill who did consume the ice cream. So probably it's not the ice cream that led to the illness. Through this graph, through this 2x2 table, we can see through these figures. Now, what is the formula? You have two choices, whichever one is feasible for you, whichever one you can remember. So it's A upon C. It's taking all the cases. It's A divided by C, and divide these people who were exposed to ice cream divided by those who are ill, not exposed to the ice cream. You divide them by the people who are not ill, who were exposed to the ice cream, divided by the people who are not ill, who are not exposed to the ice cream, particular ice cream. Or you can also have a cross product of this, which is AD divided by BC. A multiplied by D divided by B multiplied by C. So ill people are those who ate the ice cream. It's A divided by C. People who ate the ice cream divided by people who did not eat the ice cream, 13 divided by 17. And then the other part of the formula is people who did not, who are not ill, they were exposed to the ice cream, 32, and people who are not ill and did not have ice cream, 23. So when you divide these both, you have a result of 0.55, which is 0.55 means it's protective. I'll tell you how. The odds ratio, how do we calculate, how do we interpret odds ratio? That is another part. Now let's assume in another example, in a case control study, 6 of the 10 cases were exposed and 3 of the 10 controls were exposed to a certain condition. So these are the exposed people and these are the non-exposed people. I want you to calculate this odds ratio, and then please write your results. If you can just multiply these both and then these both, and then let me know the results. Okay, I'll just, it's 3.5. So initially we had a figure of 0.55, which was less than 1. Now we have 3.5. What does this mean? An odds ratio, if it's 1, that means there's no association between the exposure and the disease outcome. And if it's more than 1, that means the exposure is positively related to the disease. And if it's less than 1, as in the case of 0.55, it's negatively related to the disease outcome. That means it's protective. It is also called relative odds and cross product ratio. Please remember that case control studies may be prospective or retrospective. Retrospective means the type of case studies that case control study that I talked about, and prospective means forwards in time. So students usually think of case control studies that they're only retrospective, that we see for backwards in time. Hence, the investigator enrolls subjects who have developed the outcome of interest. However, case control studies, like cohort studies, can be either retrospective or prospective. So what happens in a prospective case control study? The investigator still enrolls based on the outcome status, but you'll have new enrollment, you'll have new cases, you'll have incident cases, you won't have prevalent cases. So when the cases come, for example, a new case of COVID-19 came, and then you took them and you took their history, their exposure history. So I highly recommend you seeing this video regarding more clarification on case control studies. Now, just a bit of the interpretation. So how will we interpret this 0.55? So people who consumed, who had a certain illness, the cases were 0.55 times less likely to have consumed or being exposed to the ice cream compared to those who did not, who were not ill. Or people, coming towards the next example, 3.5, the odds ratio is 3.5. How do you interpret it? For example, let's say 3.5 is the cases are those with lung cancer, and the controls are the people who do not have lung cancer, the controls. And we're seeing their exposure to cigarette smoking. So consider 3.5. This is a very huge, 3.5 is very huge, the odds ratio. And then we'll have a p-value also that we'll talk about in subsequent sessions. So people who people who had lung cancer were 3.5 times more likely to have been exposed to cigarette smoke compared to the controls, or compared to those people who did not have lung cancer. This is how you will interpret, and this video is very helpful. I cannot show it right now because the voice quality is not so good. So you can always have this session. I've uploaded, I'll upload it on Edmodo, and you also have